So Canadian English has a relatively centralized backer ah. And you could probably hear that a bit in my voice. I'm not exactly sure where my ah is since I lived down here for a while. But in this clip from it's from a police chief in Ottawa, you can hear the word faction for a really authentic Canadian ah.
In hindsight, what would you have done differently in this planning phase?
I suppose we would have given more credibility to the information and intelligence telling us that there was a faction that were planning on staying for a much longer period of time.
And because Canadian ah is relatively back and ah is relatively front for at least some speakers in Western New England, probably speakers from, say, the Connecticut area is relatively front. Canadian cat can be close to a Western New England cot. And I have an anecdote about this that I did mention in an earlier lecture where I said the word cat and my prospective landlord wondered why I was telling him that I had a cot I was going to sleep on rather than a bed. So the Canadian ah is generally thought to have shifted to occupy the space that was opened up when ah merged with awe. And so again, this is an example of a pull chain where the ah moves down here, and then in this diagram we have moving down to where ah is, moving down to where is. This is from a 1995 paper. It's pretty clear that the ah is centralized in Canadian English, but it's more controversial about what the rest of the changes actually are. We have some fantastic data on this now from a study that just came out this year. And in this study, I'm going to make this a little smaller so you can see the whole table in your screen. So here's ah moving down. How do we know it's moving down? Well, we have data from older speakers and younger speakers. The older speakers had it relatively front and high, and the younger speakers, it's retracting and lowering. And we do see that for these younger speakers as well, is lowering and retracting, and is lowering and retracting too. But maybe not quite as much as that first diagram that we saw, which had lowering pretty much all the way to where ah was. Okay, now we can talk about Western Massachusetts. Again, a very recent study, this time from 2021. The data were collected in 2019 from speakers in Greenfield and Springfield. Take a look especially at the changes in bat. So bat is the key word that's being used here for the ah vowel. In this paper, they're using ban as the key word for the ah before nasal. And you can see this is a speaker who was born, this is a set of speakers who were born in the 1930s. And they have this distinction between ban and bat in terms of the height and frontness of the ah. They also have a distinction between marry and Mary. So the one word is pronounced with an ah vowel, and the other words are pronounced with something more like an eh vowel. Even though the eh in this variety is down here. Compare that one, this chart. So the other thing I should mention is that thought and lot are distinct for these speakers from the 30s. Here are speakers from born in the 2000s. Mary are all together. Bat has centralized. Dresses come down a bit too. And we have the no longer any distinction between thought and lot. James Stanford very nicely sent me some examples of or he sent me actually all of the examples that were collected of the speech from the Western Massachusetts speakers. And these are from word list, from a word list, the ones I'm going to play for you now. Here's the word list. You can get this yourself if you click on, if you look at the web page. And so I'm just going to play you a couple examples right now, but the other ones are, for example, from father through Sue. So they have father, dog, Ted, tax, thought, and Sue. I'm just going to play you dog and thought. You've also got examples of Mary, Mary, and Mary that you can listen to. To my ears, it sounds like the older speaker here that we're going to be listening to doesn't have the distinction between these. The distinction that the older speaker does have, though, and I have to fix this a little bit. Okay, so here's the older speaker saying dog and thought.
Dog, dog, thought, thought. Dog, dog, thought, thought.
So you can hear a clear distinction. This second speaker is born 50 years later in a town not too far away. So the first speaker is from Ashfield. The second speaker was born in Shelburne.
Dog, dog, thought, thought.
So that speaker has the merger between the vowels. Interestingly enough, the Canadian shift, this shift from of ah moving down and central, is maybe more advanced in Western Massachusetts than in Canada. So this is the quote from their paper, where using the measures that they have, it looks like it's more robust than in the Western Canada. And then going back to this notion of push and pull chains, they did an analysis of when it seemed that the changes happened, and it looks like in their data that the shifting of the ah pushed the ah vowel away in a sense. Finally, just a note on why they did use Greenfield and Springfield. They were worried that if they interviewed speakers in Amherst and Northampton, that they would find speakers who were more influenced by other areas. Some of the speakers they did interview in Greenfield and Springfield were from Amherst or Northampton, but they lumped all the speakers together. If you listen to them, you can hear some differences perhaps, but there was no differences amongst the speakers that was statistically significant in the statistical analyses that they did.